When I was a boy, it used to be all reeds and everything, and then I couldn't say exactly when it happened, but my argument's always been with these things, it's not pollution or anything that's destroying the wetlands, it's the European carp. And as I said, when I was a boy, it used to be all reeds and there was ducks' nest, like swan's nest, and then I can't remember when the European carp came, but when they came, within years, like the reeds and everything disappeared. Probably because of the water quality, because the carp wallow in the mud and stir it all up, and it's just sort of gone backwards ever since, really.
Problems with the lagoon we've had, well, when we moved here, the water was lovely and clear. You could see everything, you could see the fish, baby fish, turtles, eels, everything that swam in it. Now, you can't see anything. There used to be a lot of wildlife. We had crested herons, we had Pacific herons, spoonbills, we still get egrets, we get cattle egrets, we get small herons and flies. A lot less, a lot fewer. We've had the crested grebe who nested here one year, and they were very pretty. I think we've seen one turtle in probably 2 years. Used to see 2 or 3 a week.
Bird watch the Cumberland Plain, and this is one of my favourite spots here because I live locally here. And we've seen, they've been recorded here 133 species of birds, 22 of which are protected under certain agreements with other countries. Talking about shorebirds in that respect. But what I'm basically doing these days is just providing bird records and observations and identifications for different groups of people to try and get them involved in birds, because they are the top of the chain. If we can save birds, we can save a lot of other things. And I've been bird watching here for 40 odd years and seen some big changes. And the lagoon now, you might think it's okay with all these darters and cormorants and ibis around, but really those birds are the only birds you get here now. You don't get many breeding birds. One time you used to get swans which would breed on here because there used to be emergent vegetation coming through which they build the nests out of. Now with these carp you get very little emergent vegetation, so you don't get breeding. And the last time I saw breeding on here from grebes, which are a small bird, was in 2003, when there was about 22 pairs breeding. They haven't been here ever since, except for a couple of weeks ago 2 arrived, but they left because conditions aren't suitable. So it's basically we're trying to get the conditions suitable to bring back the birds for breeding.
Here you've got one of your biggest problems, as I've heard, is the carp, because that's changed the water quality and that affects the plants and birds. Controlling that is a huge job. It hasn't been achieved yet anywhere in Australia. Otherwise, if you can't manage that, then you have to work with the carp and modify things accordingly. Because any of the wetlands here in this system is connected by flood. So if you manage to eradicate carp in this pond, the next flood they'll be back again. So you've got to look at the whole of the Hawkesbury system if you're going to manage these things. So it's a big challenge, and I think it's a good start that you're talking to different experts to sort of come up with a few ideas.
It's got warmer. We used to get frosts when we first came here. When we first moved to the Hawkesbury, I worked in Wilberforce, and we used to get a regular -4 degrees in the morning, frosts up to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning. Now, if you see 1 or 2 faint frosts a year, that's it. So I think the weather is definitely warming up. It seems to affect the water to a point, because the algae used to die off in the winter. Now it doesn't seem to do it so much.
You've seen the colour of the water with the carp. There's just nothing growing it, and birds can't see, or kingfishers can't see what's in the water. So yes, that's one of my main aims, try and get it back to what it used to be.
All I worry about is my cattle, like, as long as they get fat and there's grass for them to eat, I'm not overly worried. Like, I'm not saying, like, I'd love to see it go back to the way it was when I was a boy, but carp are the sort of thing, the lagoons went dry 5 or 6 years ago. They were bone dry, and people you're going to go and talk to later on, they can tell you, Keith can tell you, there was ducks came here that had supposedly never, when it refilled in overnight, it refilled in 2 days when it refilled. There was ducks came here that's never been seen here before, and Keith said they only come to clean water, like clear water, and they're a diver, and the water was crystal clear again with fresh water. But within 2 years, like within 12 months, it was full of carp this long again. Like, they just reinfested sort of within no time at all. And the next thing, those ducks left because the next thing it was all stirred up and muddy again. They have fishing comps here and catch them. I've seen the blokes in the fishing comp, there'd be say 10 of them here and nothing for them to catch anywhere from 50 to 80 fish each.
There is talking now about a virus being released in the Murray to kill the carp, and that will, if it works, thankfully, we'll see lovely clear water in this lagoon again. You can just go over the hill there and there's a lagoon there which isn't attached to any of the lagoons. It has no carp in, but it's as clean as a whistle. There is lilies growing on the top of it and lovely vegetation. So that's the difference it makes.
The banks fall in, that's the only thing. Like, over the last 30 years we've probably lost 2 or 3 metres. It's not a lot, but of bank, like, because they're consistently like burrowing around the edges.
It depends on what you want to manage for. Whether you manage from birds or fish. Obviously we've only got one fish here at the moment. And what habitat they require. And so it depends on the water levels, water depths, and so on as to what you've got there, and that will dictate what bird species you've got there. Years ago this was quite different to what it is now. We're now standing on a levee bank that was built by the government in those days, wanted to control everything. It's covered in kikuyu grass, which is another weed from Africa, and it's affecting the flow of water, whether you want that or not. We have a lagoon here, which is Bushell's Lagoon, which is quite famous for its water birds. At the moment the water level is very high because of the recent rains we've had, but there's no way of controlling the water levels as I see it. And being a wetland manager, I think one of the most important things is you have tools, and one tool is to have something to regulate water levels. We should be measuring how much water there is in there at any one time, relate that to what birds are there, what plants are growing, and that gives us a basis to work from. Without those basic tools, it's very hard. It's just people's opinion and so on. So I think talking about those sort of things is very important. So I've been around the world in a lot of places now. They've got levee banks around rivers, which have stopped flooding. They have levee banks along the coastlines, which have stopped the sea coming in. They're now removing those, because by putting the levee banks in rivers, you canalise the river, you get a flood, it goes over the banks and floods a town. And what you've done by putting the levees in, you've cut off the wetlands that normally are the kidneys of the wetland system, and for the water to go after heavy rain. So we made these channels for it to race down, floods over. For instance, Ningan, you always hear about Ningan flooding. Without the levee banks and with the natural wetlands, that wouldn't happen. So our engineers of the past have very little understanding of those concepts.
They've been pulling up the weeds and killing off the South African boxthorn, which was a real nuisance here. Next door particularly, he had acres of it. They pulled out some of the fireweed we have. We get that a lot here because the wind blows the seeds in, of course. They planted a few trees and shrubs. They've put little guards around the seedlings that we do have growing here, drop from the trees, and they take root.
My name's Stephanie Jenner. I work for Conservation Volunteers Australia, and I've been working with this Green Army team for the Stage 2 in the Bushell's Lagoon Habitat Restoration Project. The main thing that the team has been doing is they want to establish some vegetation along the edges to keep the vegetation in the bank. It's very important because a lot of the time people will lose their property because they don't have things to support and hold the embankment. So it's really important if you do have property that goes onto waterway that you have some sort of established vegetation to keep your land intact and to also keep the water quality good from excess pollutions and runoff and silt. It can all affect the quality of the waterway. And the other things we've been doing is there's a lot of weeds in here, and there's a high amount of carp. And by what we're going to be doing in Stage 2 is putting plants in the water, so they're going to be emergent plants, and we're going to be putting little fencing around them. So it's by putting 4 star picks and then putting a green fencing around it and planting in it, and that will keep the carp out and allow the plant to establish without being interfered by the carp. And also we're going to see if we can control the carp by also doing little spoons, so the little smiley faces off, and then planting and establishing sections to hope that that will keep the carp out. It's really lovely to have just the young kids out here learning about the environment, getting hands-on. We've also done some fencing to keep out cattle and horses from causing erosion onto the wetlands as well. So, and there's another section where we're doing some bank stabilisation with a duke mat, and we're protecting runoff. The species that they have been planting is this one up here. It's called the Casuarina glauca. And the other one that they've been planting is Melaleuca lineafolia. It doesn't grow above sort of 8 to 10 metres because we don't want really high trees because it will affect the way that the birds come into the water. So you want it so that they, if they have too many high trees, they won't be able to glide into the water. So that's something that we're very conscious of. They get out there and learn all the plants and learn what's a native and what's a weed, and also learn that just because something's a weed doesn't mean that it can't actually play an active role in purifying the water and improving the quality and keeping areas of protection for the birds and the fish and other species as well. So it's about teaching them, they are weeds, and the long term is we do want them to go, but it's not just that's a weed, pull it out, because we need to have that balance. And this is a project that's hopefully over the next 20 years so that this can be restored to a beautiful bush, like a beautiful lagoon again. That's really what the team wants, I suppose. That's what everyone wants.